Hello everyone, it's 1 o'clock p.m. in Japan. Welcome to the CCET webinar session. Commemorating the Earth Day, CCET is presenting the webinar on safe closure and the rehabilitation of waste dump sites based on the guideline developed by Ministry of Environment Sri Lanka with the support of CCET. Before starting, let me share with you some housekeeping announcements. We have received many questions from the participants in advance. We have gone through all the questions and the presenters will cover them in their presentation and discussion as much as possible. We may not be able to answer all the questions due to time limitation, but if you have any other questions, please put them at the chat box at the bottom of the screen. Also, we would like to receive your feedback on this webinar, so please kindly fill out the online questionnaire after the webinar. The link will be sent to your email address at the end of this session. Your feedback is pretty much appreciated to consider our future events. And this webinar is being recorded. The recording will be uploaded on the CCET website after the event. And please let me introduce the presenters today. We are very much honored to have the 4 leading experts who have extensive knowledge on dump site issues. The first presenter is Dr. Rajiv Singh. He is a researcher of CCET and responsible for the development of this guideline. As the first speaker, he will introduce the background, concepts, and the contents of the guideline. The second presenter is Dr. Anuruddha Karunaratna, Senior Lecturer at University of Peradeniya, Sri Lanka. He is the principal author of this guideline and also has been responsible for the development of training module of this guideline. He is one of the leading scholars in Sri Lanka on the waste management. The third presenter is Mr. Mahinda Werahera, Director of Environmental Pollution Control Division, Ministry of Environment, Sri Lanka. He is responsible for the waste management in Sri Lanka and has been deeply involved in the development of this guideline, representing the Ministry of Environment. He would explain the conditions that Sri Lanka faces with regard to the dump site management for waste. The final presenter is Dr. Agamutu Ariyanatanavi, a professor at Sunway University, Malaysia. He is one of the members of CCET Steering Committee and continues to provide guidance on the operation of CCET. And he is one of the most renowned professors in the field of waste management, representing Malaysia. He will introduce his observation on this subject, waste dump sites in Southeast Asia. Before their presentation, please let me invite the director of CCET, Mr. Nogawa, for the opening remark. So please let me pass the floor to Mr. Nogawa.
Okay, thank you, Tatno-san. Again, welcome to today's CCET webinar on safe closure and rehabilitation of waste dump sites. The waste management is a subject which is related to all the 17 goals of SDGs. And we can discuss waste management from any of such goals. IGES Centre Collaborating with UNEP on Environmental Technologies, CCET in short, is working for the waste management, in particular in developing countries, and from very much broad concept of views. However, today, we are going to discuss this subject, waste management, from quite pragmatic points of view, with a focus on the real and current situation of waste management, which is the management of existing waste dump sites. Further, what we are going to discuss today is not a landfill, which can be classified as a semi-engineered landfill or sanitary landfill. But what we are going to discuss today is waste dumping. Dumping of waste as a final disposal is a very much common practice in many developing countries and implemented just as the easiest way, technically and economically, to dispose valueless things without paying enough attention to the problems which may be caused by doing so. As a result of such operations, waste dump sites are causing serious problems, not only environmental ones, but also social ones, and sometimes fatal problems for the life of the people. That is why CCET has developed this guideline for safer closure and rehabilitation of municipal solid waste dump sites, responding to the request of Sri Lanka government. I hope today's webinar will provide you with practical hints on how to approach to these common but serious problems at waste dump sites all over the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Onogawa-san, for your introduction on today's subject. So let's move on to the presentation. I would like to invite the first presenter, Dr. Rajiv.
Thank you, Tasun-san. And good afternoon, everyone. So today I will be talking on the topic importance of safe closure and rehabilitation of disposal sites, global and local perspectives. So this is the content of my presentation today. And as you know, due to the rapid urbanization and industrialization, there has been increase in the waste generation, and it has led to increase in the waste dumps and landfills as a means of final disposal of residual waste. And dump sites are the mostly used methods of municipal solid waste disposal in the world, especially in the developing countries. And dump sites receives about 40% of world's waste generation and serve about 3 to 4 billion people. And these are the third largest anthropogenic source of methane in the world, accounting for approximately 11% of estimated global methane emission. And it has been estimated that at least 2 billion people do not have access to regular waste collection, and they are served by dump sites. And also 50 largest dump sites in the world affect the daily lives of 64 million people, of whom 17 million lives in Asia. So from this data, what we can learn is the popularity of dump sites and also our dependency on the dump sites, and also impacts that dump sites has on the global warming. So this shows a global scenario of waste dumps. So you can see the first photo, it is of a landfill in Payatas landfill, which is in Manila, Philippines. And this is also known as Smoky Mountain, and it is one of the 50 biggest dump sites in the world. You can see a lot of informal recyclers trying to collect valuables from the dump sites. The second photo, it is a photo taken from the Dandora dump site in Nairobi, Kenya. Here you can see a lady in the middle of dump sites standing after for a break from collecting her recyclables, and behind her you can see 2 vultures who are looking for the food inside the dump sites. And the third photo, you can see a heap of dumps on where you can see a lot of cattle grazing on the dump sites, and several scavengers looking for recyclables. This is one of the largest dump sites in Northeast India. And there is another photo which is of a dump site in Brazil. It is a dump site of a capital city, Brasilia, in South America. Here you can see a child scavenger looking for the recyclables. This dump site has already been closed in 2018 after serving for 6 decades. Another photos of a dump site in Bulgaria, and we have learned that Bulgaria has been importing a lot of waste from different countries around the Bulgaria, as well as different countries in Europe, and dumping their waste in similar kind of dump sites. And it's alarming that in the last 10 years, Bulgaria's import has 20-fold, and it has a severe impacts on environment and health. The last photo you can see, it is of a Nigambo city, a dump site which is few kilometers away from the central city, and we are closely working with this city for development of city strategy as well as implementation of pilot project. So talking about this dump site, what we came to learn that when a few decades back, when they started the operation of this dump site, the land was very uneven, and also there was a big hole in the land. However, now this all hole and the uneven gaps has been filled with this waste generated in the Nigambo city, and now it looks like a plain land. So this slide, you can see several news related to some accident or incident related to waste dumps all around the world. So this shows that there has been a lot of accidents due to improper management of dump sites, and some of them are listed here, and this has caused a lot of lives and also damage to the environment around the dump site area. So few of them are Mitamulla dump sites in Sri Lanka, Colombo, which the accident happened in 2017. Another, the Gazipur landfill in Delhi, where the landfill collapse took place in 2017, taking the life of 2 people. Similarly, there was an incident at a landfill in Addis Ababa in Ethiopia, and also there was an incident in 2015 in Shenzhen, China, where more than 70 people were killed due to the landslide. And similarly, there were another incident in Mozambique and also in Colombia. So now talking about the impact of dump sites. So there are several impacts to human health and also to the environment. So talking about the impact on the environment, if you talk about the air pollution, the most dominant the gases emitted from the waste dumps are methane and carbon dioxide, which accounts to about 90 to 98%, and this contributes to the global warming. Similarly, if you talk about the water pollution, when the rainwater penetrates the waste dumps, the leachate is formed, and the leachate contains a lot of toxic chemicals as well as a lot of pollutants. When it's further, the leachate, when it further penetrates the groundwater, it pollutes the groundwater, and when it gets leaked to the surface water or the water bodies around the landfill, it pollutes the water. Similarly, the toxic materials as well as pollutants present in the landfill also pollute the land and the soil. And the operation activities in the landfill or the waste dumps, they create a lot of noises, which also has an impact on the health of the people living around the landfill, such as the increase in the blood pressure, increase in the stress, impact on the hearing loss, and so on. Similarly, talking about the accidental fires, like when there are the activities of bacteria inside the waste dump, this creates the heat, and when the heat is generated, the area where there are a lot of bacterial activities going on, those areas are known as hotspot. And when this hotspot get in the contact of the methane gas, which is generated due to the decomposition of the organic waste, the fire takes place. And lot of times the fires in the landfills or the waste dumps are intentional due to by the operators to decrease uh, the area or to decrease the amount of the waste to make more area for to get more waste in the landfill. So now I'd like to talk about the linkage between the impact of Dumpsite on health and environment. There has been a lot of studies done to explore the impacts of Dumpsite on health and environment. Here, these two studies, one was done in the South Africa and another in the India. This, the results states that there is a likelihood or a strong relation between the impact of Dumpsites on the health. And it is more likely that the people living around the dump sites, they can suffer from several diseases like asthma, tuberculosis, diabetes, depression, and also several respiratory diseases, eye diseases, and stomach problems. And when I came across a very interesting article, which was from India Today, and I really want to share with everyone. Though the article is quite old, but the content was quite interesting to me. So I try to share, like, get this information and try to share with everyone. So the title of the article was India's Toxic Milk and Plastic Cows. So a lot of doctors, the veterinary doctors, have witnessed that several cows can swallow more than 25 kilograms of plastics. And on average, every month, 10% of cows brought in their centers are found to have plastic deposited inside their bodies. Similarly, their research also found that the plastic, if they are stuck in their belly for a longer period of time, the toxic elements in the plastic, which can contaminate the milk the cows produce, and it can easily get into the human food chain through the milk or the milk products. Similarly, there was another study done by the Veterinary and Animal Science University in 2013, which is in the Tamil Nadu, the South Indian state. They found that the milk, the cow's milk, contains some traces of cancer-causing chemicals. So this, as we saw in the photos, that several cows grazing in the landfill sites. So it's quite alarming that if we are we are using a lot of food products, especially the milk products, which from the cow and different other cattle. So this can be a very alarming that our food chain can like different kind of toxic elements can easily enter our food chain through the food source. And there was another study which shows the impact of Dumpsite on the groundwater quality. This study was done in the 4 dump sites in Nigeria, and the samples of soil and the groundwater was collected, and the research finding states that except from zinc, the average concentration of other heavy metals in the soil were much higher than the normal standard limits, and this poses significant health and environmental risk to the people living nearby the landfills. Now, talking about the waste management in Sri Lanka, here in this table you can see that about 50% of waste in the current situation is collected, and out of which about 50% of collected waste is managed effectively, and remaining 50% ends up into the open dump sites. And another part of uncollected waste is burnt or disposed in the surrounding environment. This graph shows the disposal sites in Sri Lanka for the 9 provinces, where the highest number of waste dump sites is in the southern province. And our study estimated that all uncollected waste and the waste disposals as open dump sites from 9 provinces generates 1.7 metric tons of CO2 equivalent GHGs, and each province has a greater potential to reduce GHGs by closing or converting open dumps into controlled or central landfills. So as you saw that there is a strong linkage between the impact from the dump site to the health as well as environment. And also you saw the table presented earlier that there have been more than 300 dump sites in Sri Lanka. So the government of Sri Lanka, considering the impact and also considering how to address the problem of the dump sites, they were looking for solutions to address the problem, and they requested us to assist in development of the rehabilitation guideline on waste disposal sites. And we assisted the government of Sri Lanka to develop this guideline, and this guideline has been already approved by the ministry, and ministry also organized a workshop in March to train the local authorities in line with this developed guideline. And considering the need for the translated version of guideline into local languages, Sinhala and Tamil, the ministry also developed the guideline into local languages, and this is now under the approval by the review committee of Ministry of Environment. And in line with the developed guideline, the ministry, we also developed a training module, and this training module consists of 5 sessions, and each session takes about 1 to 2 hours to complete, and each session has an introductory session in the beginning, and followed by the assessments questions, as well as in-text question for assessment for the participants during the trainings. And this module is also being translated into local languages, and these all materials will be available online in our website, as well as once it is developed, it will be distributed to all the relevant stakeholders in Sri Lanka. So any interested local governments around the world can easily access this guideline as well as this training module from IGES as well as CCET website. And also the training guideline will also, the rehabilitation guideline will also be uploaded into ministry's website, Sri Lanka Ministry of website soon. So to conclude my presentation, the dump sites has a severe health and environmental impacts, and the local authorities should shift from the open dump site to the sanitary landfill. However, they need proper strategy and technical plan. So the guideline developed by the Ministry of Sri Lanka provides proper strategy and technical guide for planning, management, pollution control, and proper closure of open dump sites in Sri Lanka. And this rehabilitation of waste dumps, open dump sites by local authorities also support Sri Lanka in achieving global agreements on SDGs and climate actions. And local authorities can also gain other benefits such as income generation from landfill mining. So this is the end of my presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank you for introducing the importance and necessity of dump site closure and rehabilitation. Then I would like to invite the next presenter, Dr. Anuruddha. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting and this initiative. Let me to start my presentation. Thank you very much, Dr. Rajiv, for a very nice introduction. So it makes my work quite easy. The core content of this presentation is based on the guideline that we have developed for Sri Lanka, but we strongly believe some of the information, and I would rather say most of the information and also the case studies that we shared in the guideline will be very useful for many countries, not only Sri Lanka, but most of the countries in similar setup, we have common issues, common problems. For example, the issue in Sri Lanka, Dr. Rajiv also highlighted that the main issue in our countries is that our urban planning is not just concentrated on the urban centers, but the population are scattered all around the countries. So we have many small and medium-sized urban cities that produce a considerable amount of waste, but not in very large quantities. Eventually, what happened, the modern facilities like mass burning or incineration or even large sanitary landfills are not built in those areas because the scale of economy and all other issues. So they tend to use very simple techniques like organic waste composting, anaerobic digestion, or some material recovery and recycling programs. But most of the waste eventually end up in open dump sites. So this was the issue in Sri Lanka as well. But very recently, during last 10 years, there were a lot of initiatives in the country to uplift the waste management sector. A lot of composting facilities and significant number of resource recycling facilities, especially plastic recycling and recovery facilities, were installed, and a very small scale, about 100 tons capacity landfill was granted by Korean government, and now a bigger landfill is under construction. And also we commenced the first ever incineration plant in Colombo. But most of our waste still end up in dump sites. If we just map these population density or the urban density and the dump site distribution or scale, it's nicely overlapped with the urban centers. Wherever we have a urban center, there is a land dumping site in the country. Totally, we have counted, and we have examined that about 339 dump sites active right now. But the unique feature is most of the dump site receiving fairly small amount of waste, majority less than 10 tons per day, and some around 70 dumps 10 to 50, and only about 20 or 22 dump sites having capacity or receiving waste more than 50 tons. So this is a unique feature of the country, and dump sites are everywhere in the country, because the population is scattered everywhere. Wherever we have higher population, we have higher densities of dump sites, and in other places, a few number of dump sites in different scales. And the issue is, since we started to, the government started to uplift the waste management sector with different initiatives, the dumping practice continues, and also there are dumps largely controlled in a manner that it only receives treated waste, treated in the sense residues from composting and recycling, but still in operation. So those dump sites are located in all the places. It's in very quality water resources like rivers and lakes, also in ocean and lagoons, wetlands, everywhere. So for by now, most of the environmental and health and all other land degradation and every issue that we discussed earlier is there in the field, or I mean in reality. So simply what we say, the damage is done. It's already there. So how to get rid of the damage, or how to remediate? So this was the basic question we had in the early stage of this process. And then we, with the help of financial and technical help from the IGES and also Ministry of Environmental, it was a kind of a teamwork, big teamwork, a big team of experts and stakeholders and also government officers worked together to develop this guideline. The guideline simply having different sections, but if I briefly explain the steps or the content, the flow of the guideline, the decision making, how to remediate, what to do is based on the dump site risk assessment approach, and then we make the decision based on the risk as well as the feasibility or the technical feasibility, financial feasibility, and the operation and maintenance feasibility of the dump site in planning stage. And then we go for engineering designs and construction works and also operation and maintenance. So this process is elaborated in next few sections. First, let me to introduce in very short the approach that we used in the risk assessment. We want to address not only the highly technical audience, but also we want to address like common people. In particular, in Sri Lanka, most of the waste management duties are handled by public health inspectors, those who are trained to be like public health officers rather than engineering officers. So they have a kind of a limitation to apply engineering principles. Likewise, we want to address a kind of a group of people who involved in the waste management, those who are not very familiar with highly technical engineering applications. That's why we try to use this simple approach. And the approach is we introduce this source pathway receptor concept in, and develop a kind of a conceptual site model. It's based on site visits and desktop studies, so remote studies, and then develop the site model, and an individual or else a team can identify what are the sources of pollutants and the other issues, and what are the migratory path or the pathways of this pollutant. It may be wind or smoke or dust emission, and also the leachate or the contaminated groundwater surface flow, and then the receiver. So the who is receiving this waste, whether it's environment, water resources, groundwater, and the general public. So with this conceptualization, they can identify what are the most critical areas to be controlled, and also how to control the pathway, and as well as how to protect the receptors. This concept then one can develop to a kind of a quantification through risk screening toolkits. We are very much happy to mention the works by AIT SIDA project started quite long ago, back in 1997, and continued for about 10 years with 4 universities in Asia. And Professor Kurian Joseph from India, Anna University, he and his team actually developed a very nice assessment toolkit for risk assessment for dump sites, particularly because we do have a lot of risk assessment tools for landfills, but rarely for dump sites. So we adapted with little bit of modification the same kind of assessment toolkit for assessing the dump site. So then it will be a kind of a very systematic approach to quantify the risk of a dump site. Once we quantify, we come up with a kind of a risk index, in the sense having a higher risk index, a quantitative number, means that there is a higher risk, and lower risk index means a lower risk. So this risk based on, again, the attribute weightage, depending on the different aspects of the regulation as well as environment pollution, and including the social and economic aspects. Then based on the pollution risk assessment, in Sri Lankan context, we develop this 5 category of classes. Dumpsite we classified into 5 classes. First class having highest score above 750 up to 1000 have we identify as highly very high hazardous sites, and less than 300 very low hazard sites. So depending on the type of classification, it's not merely because of size or the location, but a kind of a cumulative assessment based on many criteria. Then one has to make the decision whether we continue the dump site, or whether we do a little modification, or whether we have to go for a very serious modification, serious remediation action. The approach is um, a kind of a decision-making approach, where we classified these 5 classes into 2 main classes. One is unsuitable land for future extension. In any case, though the residents or the say policymakers or administrators wants to continue the dump site, technically in engineering and as well as environmental point of view, nobody can accept the continuation. So we simply say that unsuitable land for future extension, class 1 and class 2 dump sites, that must be safely closed. No other option. And then suitable land for future extension. There are dump site locations and sites that can be upgraded to a semi-engineered or fully engineered sanitary landfill. So class 3, 4 and 5 can be considered a kind of upgradable site. But the most preferred option for all the dump sites, simply because of a lot of issues, is to go for a closed safer plan, safe closure plan, and go for rehabilitation if possible. And in many cases, if they have to go for rehabilitation, definitely they have to have a alternative option for disposal, either sanitary landfilling or any modern technology like waste to energy. And in the decision making for the technical feasibility, environment feasibility, as well as for the conceptual site model development for the risk assessment, we have to, in any landfill or dump site rehabilitation project as well as landfill development project, we have to collect a lot of technical and financial as well as social data or information. Generally, we say we need the climate data, topography or land form data, and also hydrology and the ecology is also important, as well as we need some sort of history and land use, past land use, present land use, and future land use, not only within the dump site area, but also in maybe in the regional plan, how it is merged with the regional plan, so on. So this sort of information are very important. In this guideline document, we mentioned the data sources and how to obtain these data in Sri Lankan context, but I think it's applicable for many other countries as well. Then the next step is to get more site-specific data. Most of the data we mentioned in the first stage, maybe we can source from the secondary sources, but for the site-specific data, generally we have to spend some time on the field and collect these data and compile and analyze with the support from experts. Here in this segment, we need expert opinion and expert support in the data obtaining or the information obtaining. For instance, geological surveys, so like pollution, like leachate to gas composition analysis. So that sort of information we have to get from the expert analysis for expert laboratories likewise. Then once we collect all these data, then we can use this data to decide based on environment feasibility as well as engineering feasibility. Engineering feasibility, we can decide to which level we should close the dump site. It may be a minimum closure if the risk is very low, or maybe a very advanced closure level if the risk is very high. For example, in C4, very advanced closure level, even we have to recommend maybe a groundwater remediation technique like a permeable reactive barrier or some other groundwater remediation techniques, depend on the level of risk, and also leachate treatment, not only leachate control in simple manner, but with a very high-tech leachate control system if the dump site having a greater risk for the environment and health. And with this, engineers can plan for different applications of techniques for slope stabilization. There are a lot of slope stabilization techniques, and also different techniques for leachate treatment with different arrangement. Generally, we call it site specific because we have to adjust the standard practices to match with the condition in the sites, not unlike in standard landfill design. Same applied for the gas collection and treatment, and also slope drainage management, turfing, and everything. Generally, we make into a kind of a site-specific design based on the characteristic of the dump sites. So this is the basic idea of the guideline document, and one of the sections will be dedicated for sharing some of the case studies in Sri Lanka, and also a small study on the India case study. Here we have in Sri Lanka a few dump site rehabilitation projects. One is Kandy Gohagoda rehabilitation. There is Nuwarelia Moon Plains, and also the ongoing Meethatumulla dump site rehabilitation project. Here in the manual, we explain the risk assessment and the process of rehabilitation of the Nuwarelia Moon Plains dump site. It was a kind of a fairly medium-sized dump site located in a forested area just at the border of Nuwarelia, a very famous tourist town. It was in a kind of a valley, and in a very, very desperate situation with a lot of fires and a lot of leachate pollution issues. And with the support of Japan International Cooperation Agency, JICA, a team of experts was dispatched, and we also work as a local expert in the system. And we developed the project. First was to get the stakeholder concession, their support to develop the project, and then a lot of engineering surveys was conducted, and then site design was developed based on the site-specific characteristics, and then the most importantly, the environmental approval for the project from the Central Environment Authority through an initial environment examination process, and then project financing. JICA came forward to finance for this project for the Nuwarelia Municipal Council, and also Nuwarelia Municipal Council, they allocate their own funds for a lot of activities. And then this rehabilitation started in 2002, late 2002, by clearing the land and relocating the waste into different stages and different locations, and then developing this into a kind of a semi-engineered fill landfill, and including the leachate treatment and leachate collection systems, gas collection, gas treatment system. Most of them are site-specific technologies. And then some other auxiliary facilities, stormwater collection and diversion, as well as training facility. And finally, very importantly, the operation and monitoring, we appointed a priest of the area as the committee chair. So it was very kind of a supportive activity from the public. Finally, we achieved quite good success. Even today, it's managed in a fairly good way compared to many other dump sites in the country in a kind of a semi-engineered landfill. So with this, I conclude my presentation. Let's discuss during the discussion session. Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing the experience in Sri Lanka from academic perspective. Then please let me invite the next presenter, Mr. Mahinder. The floor is yours.
Okay. Sorry for the delay. And my topic is need for the guideline of rehabilitation of waste dump and its implementation. And let me to tell that Dr. Anuruddha has already make the relevant content in the document. I just want to go through it in a administrative set regarding administrative and political angle. As Dr. Anuruddha correctly mentioned, we have 339 dump sites in Sri Lanka, and most of them are located in highly populated provinces in Sri Lanka. And these open dump sites causes severe impact on environment, public health, and also safety. I think Dr. Rajiv has explained the impact of dump site. And the landslide collapse in Meetotomolla, which was happened very recently, ended up with 32 fatalities and then destruction of 87 houses. You can imagine what is the impact caused by poorly managed land. This picture indicate the site after this destruction. And fortunately, we were able to recover it to some extent. You can compare the pictures of 2017 and 2021 this year. And why this rehabilitation waste guideline is important, let me to explain about the importance of this guideline. And we have prepared our national policy on waste management in 2019. The vision of the policy is to manage the waste sustainably for a healthy life and a clear environment for all. And mission is develop an eco-friendly nation by promoting resource conservation and circulation. As you know, the circular economy principle is followed in preparation of this policy, and also the principles of waste management. And our national policy is having several chapters. In the 8th chapter, we have indicated policy statements. So in the policy statement related to knowledge management and capacity building, this is where the education and awareness creation, skill development, training and research development is addressed. I think that we have clearly identified the necessity of this kind of guideline in our policy. Until this document, we don't have actually enough knowledge in technical inventions to rehabilitate existing guidelines. The guideline is the simple guideline prepared by Dr. Anuruddha and his team. Is a timely requirement of the country. And how we are going to use this guideline is this the guideline, picture of the guideline. I think you have seen it. And then we are going to arrange a series of awareness programs, which will help at least to make aware of the issue and general knowledge building on the non-technical people who are managing this waste dump, most of the waste dump. And accordingly, the first program was held in last month, and then relevant stakeholders who participated in the guide in this workshop. This is the picture of the workshop. The field visit they have conducted, and then the participants include from our ministry, Central Environmental Authority, and Ministry of Provincial and Local Government, National and the Waste Management Authority, Ministry of Urban Development, etc., which represent all the required stakeholders. And challenges and opportunities of municipal solid waste dump site. I think as challenges, the most paramount requirement at the moment is this lack of financial resources. We don't have enough resources, and lack of know-how. I think it's halfly fulfilled by this guideline. And another challenge is lack of, the poor attitude of some individuals involved in decision making as well as management of these guidelines. As you know, in countries like countries in our region, most of this local level political hierarchy is, I think, due to many reasons, they prepare building of a waste dump rather than managing the waste. Most of the cases, I am not telling 100%, but most of the cases, that is the experience. Unfortunately, we have to mention it. And then opportunities, I think, if we can manage this dump in an environmentally friendly manner, like we will be able to recover some resources, and sometimes this rehabilitated dump site can be used as other economical environment importance purposes. I think this to mention about this document, and this will be an kind of a document that we can show the funding agency that Sri Lanka is ready to move toward this rehabilitation of all this dump site. Thank you very much. I hope that I will be able to join in the discussion if you have any issue regarding this. Thank you very much for CCET and IGES for preparing this, assisting Sri Lanka to prepare this guideline. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight from the government perspective. Then the final presenter, Professor Agamutsu, please.
Okay, thank you, MC, and also thank you for inviting me to join this important topic of discussion. My focus will be only on Southeast Asia, the countries of Southeast Asia. So we are talking about a population of 650 million people, and about half of this population actually is in the urban centers. Okay. Now, when we are looking at how much waste is being generated, we are looking at an average of 1.14 kilograms per person per day. This is the average for Southeast Asia. Of course, some countries have lower per capita of even 0.5, and some has got even much higher. And among the Southeast Asian countries, Indonesia actually is the leader in waste generation quantity, because they're generating about 64 million tons a year, followed by Thailand, and so on. So I will not go through the statistics one by one. And what is happening is that in all Southeast Asian countries, the waste is predominantly organic. Usually it's about 50% is organic. This means we are talking about the emission of landfill gas in dump sites and landfills. And an exception to the Southeast Asian countries with a low organic material is Singapore, where the organic fraction is only about 10 to 11%. And of course, there are also exceptions for Singapore in the sense that almost 100% of the waste is converted to waste to energy in their incineration plants, unlike the other countries. So we can say that the Southeast Asian countries are all developing countries except for Singapore, because you can see that in terms of the GDP and so on, they are all developing countries, and we have typical characteristics of a developing country in the sense that bulk of this waste is actually disposed in the dump site. So open dumps and open burning are very common features in Southeast Asia, simply because of the high amount of organic material that is being disposed, because at the moment there is no provisions or regulations that limits the amount of organic waste that is going into the landfill. And one of the features of this developing country is that the recycling rate is much higher. And this is mainly done by the informal sector. I think we have to recognize that informal sector plays an important role in many developing countries in Southeast Asia, particularly in Indonesia, in Thailand, Cambodia, and so on, where the recycling is mainly by these people. Of course, Singapore is exception once again, because they have a very high amount of organized recycling in Singapore. And the bulk of the waste, of course, is, I think in many countries, 80 to 95% of the waste is still going to dump sites. If you look at Malaysia as a case study, we still have about 120 dump sites, and our sanitary landfills are only about less than 20. So we have a similar situation in other countries in Southeast Asia. In some countries, I think almost 100% of the waste is still going to the dump sites because there's no proper treatment or waste centers for them. In most of the ASEAN countries, when we talk about waste governance, we have good regulations, national strategies to address the challenges. For example, we have Environmental Act, and also like Green Growth, Sustainable Development, and Climate Change Policy, Regulatory Framework, and so on. So most of the countries, like for example, in Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, and Thailand, they do have specific regulations for waste management. But the question is how effective is the implementation of these regulations is another thing, and enforcement is a matter of question, because like we do have regulations on waste separation, but very minimal separation is actually taking place for various reasons. And one of the reasons that can be cited in these countries is that there is disharmony or organizational failure and lack of coordination among the various agencies responsible for waste management in the country. So even in one country, there could be 2 or 3 agencies, including local government and federal government, or a special department, so that the coordination among these is lacking, and that is one of the biggest issue in Southeast Asian countries. And if you look at the gaps, it's quite clear that one of the issue is the rapid growth in the volume of waste. Most countries are reporting anything from 1 to 3% annual increase in MSW. And another complexity is the waste composition itself. The high moisture content, sometimes we have hazardous waste, about 1 or 2% of hazardous waste, which contaminates the municipal solid waste. So this is a typical scenario in Southeast Asian countries, simply because of the lack of proper source separation. So these are some of the challenges. For example, the technology, infrastructure, or financing, policy, stakeholder participation. So we can list all these as the challenges that these developing countries are facing. And I would not like to include Singapore in this category. Of course, they are much more efficient. So the many ASEAN countries are planning to shift into the waste to energy, but because of the cost constraints, the transformation is rather slow. And I think attention must be given to the front end management, like, for example, waste separation or waste minimization. And these are some of the important things that we need to consider for sustainable consumption of resources and also for the sustainable development goals achievement in these countries. And of course, the one of the biggest issue with dump sites is, of course, the release of landfill gas and leachate. On the average, about 150 liters per ton of leachate is being released 24 hours. And this is, of course, is being made more complicated because of the high amount of rainfall in the Southeast Asian countries. And of course, greenhouse gas is generated passively. And we have about 3% of the national greenhouse gas emissions in Malaysia coming from waste sector. And so what I would like to recommend is that the three important aspects of sound management, that is policy and regulatory framework, institutional, technical, and performance, and lastly, funding, financing, and economic aspects of sustainable waste management need to be considered in the future waste management development. So I think with that, I would like to conclude my presentation on Southeast Asia. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Professor Agamutu, for sharing your observation in Southeast Asia. Then let's move on to the panel discussion. The discussion will be moderated by Mr. Onogawa.
Okay, thank you very much. We have a plan to do a roundtable discussion, but before that, we have received various questions from the participants at the time of their registration to this webinar. So I have compiled some of those questions. In this PPT, and I'd like to invite our speakers to respond to those questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Onagawa.
Dr. Anuruddha, can you see this slide?
Yeah, I'm seeing
okay.
sides.
There are the four questions which I have. I am planning inviting you to respond to these questions. All of these are rather quite a big subject and cannot be complete our discussion within a very short period of time, but could you kindly consider to provide very much quick answers or your observations on those points were listed here? So please.
Yeah. Thank you. I think these are like, I totally agree with you. Very, very interesting and very kind of a common kind of question where we receive from many practitioners as well as from general public in different from different stakeholders. The first is the legacy waste or the mine waste or maybe stored waste in like already disposed waste. One of the technique, I think more than in Sri Lanka, in India, quite a lot of experiments as well as pilot projects, and also as far as you know, some ongoing projects are there to use these legacy waste for different applications. It's totally depend on the resource recoverable potential if we are going for like resource recovery. But in Sri Lankan context, if I share our experience during last say 20 years, is that in our dump site, almost like 80% or more than 80% of waste is like unusable, like soil-like fraction. Even it's not good for kind of as a soil amendment, something like compost-like substances. It's not. It's mainly like sand, soil, and heavily contaminated waste, because we in our countries we do a lot of street sweeping that contaminates a lot of sand and other waste. So plastics and other burnables are quite small, generally less than 20%, and also metal and other materials are, as Professor Agamuthu very correctly pointed out, our informal sector pick up all these highly valuable, marketable recyclables from our waste stream before it's disposed. So by mining or other activities or processing, we can only recover actually a very small amount of waste. So best thing is go for a safe closure. In my opinion, I would say safe closure is more environmental and financially, socially feasible, rather than trying to recover resources from mining or from legacy waste. And second, the bioremediation is a good technique, fairly a good technique, more than, because most of the time scientists and sometimes practitioners believe on bioengineering as only a measure of reducing the maybe heavy metal or something, but it is not. There are a lot of other benefits, like even for methane oxidation, this remediation or like vegetation-based systems are really working well, especially capping and other contaminated site remediation. So it's a good technique, but especially when it's when we use bioremediation for heavy metals and some of the pollutants that accumulate in the plants, we have to be be careful, because a plant matter in long run recirculate all these pollution back into the system. So we should have a kind of a good way of harvesting or removing plants and extracting or like converting or stabilizing the pollutants in the plant. So these, if it is applied, we can use, even in the guideline we have proposed different type of vegetation for different remediation actions, bioremediation. And yeah, cost of closure, we showed a couple of examples. Even in my presentation, I showed an example. And in some cases, we have estimated cost of rehabilitation in Sri Lankan context. Of course, we can share those information. And idle time, it's depend on the type of waste we have in the dump site, and also how do we manage the dump sites. But in many cases, dump sites are quite old, so only a small area is very fresh, but majority is quite old. Say if it is operate for 30 years, maybe 90% of the way dump site is quite old, so we can start the remediation immediately in most of the cases. So I think I just mentioned adequately for these 4 questions. Onagal-san?
Thank you very much, Dr. Anuruddha, for your nice the answers. And let me move on. Next is Professor Aga. These are the questions I have prepared, requesting your response. Professor
Okay.
Aga.
Now, thank you very much, Onagawa-san. I think my name is spelled wrongly. Okay, let me take up. How about the merits of landfill remediation? I think this is a very long answer, but I'll make it very short. When you talk about remediation, I think we are looking at all the various types of pollutions and impacts on environment and the human. So it has to be. It is very important. definitely. And we have to look at the landfill gas, leachate treatment, air pollution, and health implications so on. Okay, so it is important to look at the remediation, but I'm not very sure whether the question is also asking about remediation of the soil, because in many cases, when the landfill is mined, that means when a landfill is, they do landfill mining, then again, also landfill remediation is required to clean the soil for any future use. So second question is, would it be feasible to sort plastic fraction and convert the solid RDF and use it locally as fuel? Yes. Again, it depends on this quantity of material available in the dump site. Because you see, whenever we talk about harvesting the landfill contents, whether it is for waste to energy or whether we are even thinking about the landfill gas, the first question is how much waste is sitting in the dump site. And then only we can actually decide whether it's economically feasible for us to use. I mean, theoretically, yes, you can harvest the plastic and shred it and pelletize it or and use it for RDF. There is no issue with that. And the third question is it possible from a safety and technical perspective for a rehabilitated landfill to be used as an area for a waste to energy installation? Okay, here the answer is yes, provided the waste is removed from that place. If the waste is not removed, then we will have settling problem. So I've come across many examples of landfill being used. In some cases, they do landfill mining and then they do remediation of the soil and then they use the place for development. If we have a very large scale project in Malaysia where they do landfill mining and they are going to convert it into a mini city center, that is possible, provided the waste is completely removed. Because if you don't remove the waste, then you will have settling problem, and then other things will be a risk to establish anything that is heavy on this place. So once again, whether you want to develop the place, it again depends on how much material is sitting in the landfill in the first place and how old is the landfill. For example, if you are talking about landfill which is less than 5 years old, a dump site less than 5 years old, obviously you will have a lot of landfill gas issues, and obviously that is high risk. So people don't even do mining in that area because it's very dangerous to do landfill mining. If the landfill is or the dump site is very fresh, you can't do much unless, of course, you remove the capture the landfill gas first. Otherwise, we are asking for a high risk situation. I hope I've answered the questions to the satisfaction of the people who have raised the questions. Thank you, Onogawa-san.
Okay, thank you very much, Professor Aga. So let's move on. Next, I'd like to invite Mr. Mahinda for these two questions. Mr. Mahinda, please.
Is there any policy formulation for municipal waste management in Sri Lanka that you clear guidelines? Now, actually, in preparation of national waste management policy, our objective was to address all type of waste. So, in Sri Lankan context, waste management of waste types depend on responsibility for management of waste type is different. Like for instance, we believe that healthcare waste should be managed by Ministry of Health. So we expect to develop oral policies under this national waste management policy. So I likewise the municipal solid waste management, the responsibility for the policy should be developed by local government, Ministry of Local, Provincial Councils and local government. I think this under this policy, we are going to have discussion with the Ministry of Local Government to develop, to explore the possibility of developing this kind of policy if necessary. And what is the next question? What is the biggest problem for Sri Lankan municipal waste disposal management system? Actually, the biggest problem is not technical, I think. Most of the time it is administrative and political. That is because, time to time, this local government leaders are elected. So it is very difficult to follow a consistent policy or continuous activity. That is because they are like working towards votes actually. Even though if the newly elected person believe that this is very attractive and it is beneficial for his what you call followers, he will follow that one rather than doing, because in local government act they have executive power. That is the reason we are not in a position to follow a continuous practices in this in the local authorities, where the most of these dump sites are located. That is the situation in Sri Lanka.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mahinda, for your response on these points. So, final question is to Dr. Rajiv, our CCET colleague.
Thank you, Vanavasa. So the question goes, how do we create waste management system in rural areas which are hard to reach? So in general scenario, most of the time in the rural setting, where you can find absence of proper waste collection system, and most of the residual waste is dumped in the environment. So, but the good thing is that most household waste in rural areas is organic with little inorganic materials, and the waste is non-toxic. So due to this nature, composting is highly suitable methods of waste management in rural areas. So household composting, the municipality could encourage the household composting, and the municipality in urban areas could encourage the informal recyclers to collect the recyclables and some inorganic waste which is not collected by informal sector due to the low recycling value, and also the residual waste. Those materials needs a storage facility. So community-based storage facility could be arranged, and intermunicipal cooperation between cities and rural municipalities could be established. So this helps in the establishment of this regional waste management facility, where the waste stored in these rural communities can be brought into this regional facility and processed and recycled. However, when we are considering to establish this waste management facility, the regional one, it should be established in more accessible location. However, to establish this facility, the municipalities must be supported by financial instrument, something like subsidies, soft loan, tax incentives, national and international fund. So in this way, I think we can solve the waste management problem in rural settings. Thank you.
Thank you, Rajiv. So we have received also a little bit different types of questions from the participants, but unfortunately These questions are also a huge subject, and we need time to discuss this kind of the questions. Unfortunately, today we cannot work on these questions, but I hope you would visit our homepage, which is https://www.ccetjp, where you'll find the publications, the page in which you will see various information or discussions made by CCET. I hope that one would somewhat contribute to answer the points you have raised, but unfortunately we could not discuss at this webinar. Having said so, we have around 7 minutes left for our discussion. And using that 7 minutes, I'm quite interested in having a discussion or learning the opinions of all the speakers on the subject of implementation of this guideline. As we have explained or introduced, we have developed this guideline. That is why that is because we understand the importance of this subject, very much common in every part of the world. But preparation of the guideline is still a paperwork. And we know that only the paperwork does not answer to solve the real problems on the ground. So perhaps how we can implement such a guideline, and also how we can enforce to work on this the problem. Those are the most important the points when we expect a real materialization of such a change in our dump sites or waste management. So our time is very much limited. So maybe each speaker, I hope you can introduce your opinions about the implementation, what is important, how we can proceed to better implementation in a very, very short words. Starting from Dr. Anuruddha.
Thank you, Anagawa-san. With my experience in Sri Lanka and also with some other countries, yeah, we are having all these dump site issue and many other issues because our economies are not strong enough to support standard, or I would say the appropriate or high-tech technologies. On the other hand, being poor, a lot of our local governments and dump sites managers and even the government and ministries, they have an opportunity to look for maybe some different fund sources, especially granted sources. There are a lot of opportunities. Nowadays, we realize, especially coming under climate change funds and a lot of other environment funds, there are a lot of funds available in different avenues. So local authorities can look for those funds, and we realize even in Sri Lanka, at least a couple of projects we succeed to raise funds from the external sources, and also like approaches like polluter pay or other approaches may strengthen the local authorities to reserve some funds for rehabilitation work. So this is my opinion, but it should be a priority in anyhow, should not limit the activities because of financial issues.
Professor Aga, can you be the second?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the issues that I was not able to mention earlier is that in most of the developing countries, when they actually create this, I say create because sometimes these dump sites are not planned actually. Is the budget for closure and remediation. So there is generally no budget for closure and remediation. So one of the main options that I would like to recommend or suggest is that a very high level workshop has to be arranged when a guideline is ready for application. So this workshop will involve all policymakers and other stakeholders, including funding agencies and decision makers in one workshop. And it is easier to make a decision with that kind of group sitting there on the implementation and application of the guidelines. Thank you, Honorable.
Thank you very much, Professor Aga. So next, Mr. Mahinda from Sri Lankan perspectives.
Actually, I was not in the seat because I want to attend another official matter. Okay.
Okay, so sorry for your busy schedule. What I asked you or the panelists was just a brief comment on your observation, how we can implement such and well-developed guidelines, how we can put forward our activities on waste dump site improvement or activities. Very much briefly, I would appreciate it if you can provide any comment for that.
Yeah, let me do in Sri Lankan context.
Yes.
First is that we have to make aware of these decision makers the importance of managing the existing waste dump site. That is one of the most important activity. And then we have to make aware the people who are dealing with waste and waste management, including dump site. How can, on the aspect, how can we start the rehabilitation of the existing dump site, and how to avoid developing of this kind of dump site, in short, by making aware the hierarchy of waste management, and then what to call the all other aspect. In short, means like since they do not focus enough on waste management activity, not because of lack of resources, I think, lack of managing, poor management of the existing resources leads to this kind of situation. There are also some economic reasons for this kind of dump site. So it's a challenging task. Change the attitude of these high-level decision makers related to in the local authorities, and then making aware the people who are really dealing with waste management to stop developing this kind of dumps and to manage the existing dump site. That is what in brief.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahinda. Now, our discussion time is almost up, and we have to give up to continue the discussions. Although it is a very much interesting discussions, and I think through the discussion today, we could share the importance of this subject or of this problem of the waste dump site around the world. And we could understand, or we could share the similar observations that we have to work on this subject. But for the proper the implementation of such an idea, or the taking our actions, we have various difficulties. As was introduced, were the political situations, or were financial problems and others. And there was another proposal to organize high-level meetings within the government to develop same understanding on the importance of this subject. And sometimes it can be discussed in the high level policy plan, such as for example, 5 years, 10 years, long-term development plan of the government. How we can put this waste management subject in the agenda of such high-level policy document. That can be also one of the way to approach to these problems. And also, waste management subject is not a simple technology issue, which will require the interest or involvement of all the stakeholders, including the private sector, governments, the local authorities, general public, and others. We have to consider how we can invite all the stakeholders into the discussion with the same purpose to improve the waste management. So these are somewhat I would like to summarize from the discussion today. But as I explained, or I have introduced the website of CCET, please visit that CCET website, where you will see various documents and the activities we have carried out so far. Although CCET is a young organization which has only 5 years, 6 years of working experience, but you will, I am sure, you will enjoy the information available in that website. Having said so, I would like to conclude today's discussion, and thank you very much again for all the speakers by sparing your valuable and busy time for today's discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.